I didn't drop the wine glass. I didn't say a word. I just stood there in the doorway of my son's basement, looking at the workbench where my photograph was pinned to a corkboard, with red markers circling my face and a date written underneath in my daughter-in-law's neat schoolteacher handwriting. February 14th. 3 weeks away. Valentine's Day. I had walked downstairs to find a roll of paper towels because someone had spilled cranberry sauce on the dining room rug, and instead, I had found the timeline for my own murder. My name is Hollis Brennan. I'm 68 years old, and on the night I'm going to tell you about, I was eating Christmas dinner at the home of my son and his wife in a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb of Hartford, Connecticut. I had been a widower for 11 years by then. My wife Margaret had passed from ovarian cancer when our boy was still in his 20s, and after she went, the house we had shared felt like a coat, 2 sizes too big. I sold most of what was in it. I drove a 2003 Buick LeSabre with a dent in the passenger door. I wore the same brown corduroy jacket to every family event for the better part of a decade. When my son's wife introduced me to her book club, she called me, with a small apologetic smile, my husband's dad, the retired bookkeeper. Bookkeeper. That word had been my shield for 31 years. What none of them knew, what not even my own son knew, was that Margaret and I had spent the early years of our marriage buying small commercial properties along the I-91 corridor, strip malls in towns nobody was looking at, 2 laundromats, a self-storage facility outside Springfield. By the time Margaret got sick, that quiet little portfolio had a market value north of $43 million, held in a trust she and I had set up before our son was old enough to ride a bicycle. Margaret made me promise something on the last good afternoon we had together. She said, "Don't hand it to him, Holly. Make him earn his life. If he turns into a man worth giving it to, give it. If he doesn't, give it to somebody who will use it right." I promised her. I kept the promise. And for 25 years, I lived like a man who clipped coupons and worried about the price of gas, because that is what I had told my son I was, and because I wanted to see who he became when he thought there was nothing to inherit. Let me tell you who he became. My son's name is Trent. He's 39. He's tall, like Margaret was, and he has her eyes, which is the cruelest joke God ever played on me. He works in commercial insurance, doing what I never could quite get him to explain in plain English. He married a woman named Betrayal 6 years ago. Betrayal teaches 4th grade at a private school in West Hartford, and she has the loud, careful warmth of someone who has practiced being likable since she was 12. They have 1 daughter, my granddaughter, who is 4 years old, and the only reason I still drove to that house. Her name is Wren. When I tell you about Wren, you should know I am leaving a lot out, because she is not part of what these 2 people did, and I will not put her into a story like this any more than I have to. That Christmas Eve, I arrived at 6 o'clock with a poinsettia and a wrapped book for Wren. Betrayal answered the door in a red apron and kissed my cheek and called me Pop, which she had started doing about a year earlier and which I had never asked for. The house smelled like roast pork and rosemary and something burnt under it that nobody was admitting to. Trent was in the kitchen pouring wine into glasses that were too big. He didn't turn around when I came in. He said, "Hey, Dad," with the same flatness he used to say, "Hey," to the kid who delivered our pizza when he was 16. We sat down at the table around 7. There were 6 of us. Me, Trent, Betrayal, Wren, Betrayal's mother Loretta, and a man I had never met before named Curtis, who Betrayal introduced as a family friend. He does some financial planning. You'll love him, Pop. Curtis had a soft handshake and the kind of teeth that come from a dentist who specializes in television personalities. He sat down next to me. He asked me, within the first 90 seconds of our conversation, what kind of healthcare directives I had on file. I should have known then. Looking back, sitting here now, I can tell you I felt it. I felt it the way an old dog feels, a storm coming 20 minutes before the thunder. But I had been Margaret's husband for 34 years, and one of the things she had taught me was that you don't run when you feel the storm. You walk to the window, and you look at the sky, and you find out what kind of storm it is. So I smiled at Curtis. I told him I was just an old bookkeeper. I didn't have much to plan around, and I asked him to please pass the rolls. The dinner went the way those dinners go. Brielle told a long story about a parent at her school who had complained about the curriculum. Loretta drank 3 glasses of wine and laughed too hard at things that weren't funny. Trent kept checking his phone under the table, the way he had been doing since he was 13, and I never broke him of it. Wren ate exactly 4 bites of pork and then asked to be excused to play with the new dollhouse her mother had bought her, which sat in the living room, and which, I noticed, had a price tag still stuck to the back that read $499. Wren is 4. The dollhouse will be in a storage unit by spring. Around 8:30, Loretta knocked her glass over. Cranberry sauce had already gone on the rug an hour earlier from some incident with Wren, but now there was wine on top of it, and Brielle stood up making a noise of practiced distress and started dabbing at it with a cloth napkin. She asked Trent to go get paper towels from the basement pantry. Trent didn't move. He said, "Dad, you mind? They're on the second shelf down there, behind the canned tomatoes." He didn't look up from his phone. I said, "Sure." I got up. I walked down the hallway, past the framed wedding photo where Margaret's chair at the reception was empty because she had already been gone 2 years by then, and I opened the basement door. And I went down the wooden steps holding the railing because my left knee had been bad since a roofing job in 1994. The basement was finished, mostly. There was a workshop area at the far end with a workbench Trent had built himself when they first moved in, back when he was still pretending he had hobbies. There was the pantry shelf to the right of the stairs. I got the paper towels first. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand. I was not snooping. I was a 68-year-old man getting paper towels for his son's wife. I had the roll under my arm. I was about to turn around and go back upstairs, but the workbench light was on. It shouldn't have been. Nobody had been down there all evening. The light was a little gooseneck lamp clamped to the edge of the bench, and it was throwing a yellow circle onto a corkboard that had been mounted to the wall above the bench. I took 2 steps toward it before my brain caught up to my eyes, and then I stood there. There were 4 photographs on the corkboard. 3 of them were of me. One was the Christmas card I had sent them 2 years ago, my face squared off in red marker. One was a photograph someone had taken of me sitting in the waiting room at my cardiologist's office, which meant somebody had followed me there. The third was a candid of me getting into my Buick outside my apartment building, taken from across the street with a long lens. And next to all 3 of those, taped to the corkboard with a piece of blue painter's tape, was an index card. On it, in Brielle's handwriting, the handwriting I had seen on 100 thank you notes and birthday cards, were 3 lines. Subject: HB. Window. Feb 10/17. Optimal. Feb 14. Evening, prior to scheduled cardiology follow-up. Underneath the index card was a manila folder. I opened it. Inside were printouts. My medication list, which I had never given them. My cardiologist's name and address. A printout from a website I had never heard of explaining the lethal interaction between digoxin, which I take, and a particular over-the-counter sleep aid, which I do not. There was a copy of a will. It was my will. It was not the will I had on file with my attorney. It was a forgery, and it left everything I owned, which they believed was an apartment and a Buick and maybe $40,000 in savings, to my son Trent. There was a notary stamp on it. The notary, I would later learn, was Curtis, the man who had, 20 minutes earlier, asked me about my healthcare directives. I want to tell you that I cried, or that I sank to my knees, or that I felt the world tilt the way they do in movies. I didn't. I felt nothing for about 4 seconds. Then I felt a coldness come up from the soles of my feet and settle in my chest, where it has lived ever since. And I felt Margaret next to me, the way I sometimes do, and I heard her voice as plain as if she were reading a recipe out loud. And what she said was, "Walk back upstairs, Holly. Walk back upstairs and finish your dinner." So I did. I closed the folder. I left it exactly where it was. I straightened the corner of the index card so it sat the same way I had found it. I clicked off the gooseneck lamp. Because it had been off when I came down, I was sure of it now. Somebody had been down there in the last hour and had forgotten to turn it off. I went back up the stairs holding the paper towels under my left arm and my right hand on the railing. And when I came back into the dining room, Brielle said, "Oh, Pop, thank you. You're a lifesaver." And I handed her the roll, and I sat back down, and I picked up my fork, and I ate the rest of my pork roast, and I asked Loretta about her arthritis. I stayed another 40 minutes. I kissed Wren on the top of her head when she came to say goodnight. I told Trent the dinner was lovely. I shook Curtis's hand. I drove home in the Buick, doing exactly the speed limit, the entire way, through a light snow that had started somewhere around Wethersfield. I did not call 911 from the basement. I want to be clear about that, because some of you hearing this are going to wonder. I didn't call from the basement because what I had seen on that corkboard was by itself not enough. A folder with my medication list, a photograph, a forged will that had not yet been used. Any defense attorney with a pulse would have it dismissed as a fantasy, a thought experiment, a project Brielle was researching for some true crime podcast. I needed them to act. I needed them to act. I needed them in front of witnesses with documentation to actually try. I called 911 4 weeks later. I'll get to that. When I got back to my apartment that night, I sat down at my kitchen table and I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a woman named Adelaide Voss, who had been my late wife's college roommate and who had spent 30 years as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York before she retired to a farmhouse outside Litchfield. Adelaide answered on the second ring, even though it was past 11. I told her what I had seen. She didn't interrupt me. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Hollis, you need to do exactly what I tell you to do. Don't change anything. Don't act differently. Don't accuse them. We're going to let them write the rest of the story themselves, and we are going to make sure every word of it is on record." Then she said, "Margaret would want me to ask, are you all right?" I told her I didn't know yet. The second call was to a man named Roderick Pang, who had managed our trust portfolio since 1991 and who knew, down to the dollar, what I was actually worth. I told him to put a hold on every account, every transfer, every signature authority. Nothing moved without a phone call from me. Voice verified, with a code phrase only he and I would know. The code phrase was the name of a diner we had eaten at once in 1987. I won't tell you the name. The third call was to a private investigator Adelaide had used for 20 years. A man named Octavio Reyes, who lived in West Hartford and who, according to Adelaide, was the most patient surveillance operator she had ever worked with. He came to my apartment the next afternoon, a Sunday, while my son and his wife were no doubt still washing the wine glasses. We sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours. I told him everything. He took notes in a small black book. At the end, he asked me a question that I have thought about every day since. He said, "Mr. Brennan, the hardest part of this work is not the listening. The hardest part is that you will hear them say things on tape that you cannot unhear. You will hear your son discuss your death, the way he discusses an oil change. You need to decide right now whether you want to know that or whether you want to remember him the way you remember him today." I didn't answer for a long time. Then I told him I had buried my wife, and I had told her on her last afternoon that I would do right by our son, and that doing right by him meant finding out who he actually was, even if the truth was a knife. I told Octavio to plant the microphones. He put 3 of them in, one in the lampshade in their living room, one in the underside of the dining room table, one, for reasons he explained that I won't bore you with, inside the smoke detector in the master bedroom, which he replaced with an identical model that nobody would think to inspect. He did all of this on a Tuesday afternoon in early January when Brielle was at her school, Trent was at his office, and a locksmith friend of Octavio's, who I will not name, opened the back door of the Colonial without leaving a mark. Then we waited. In the 4 weeks between Christmas Eve and the second week of February, I went about my life the way I always had. I drove to the supermarket on Tuesdays. I had coffee with 2 old friends from the Rotary Club every Thursday morning. I went to my cardiologist on the date that had been on the index card, the morning of February 7th, 3 days before the window opened, and my doctor told me as he had told me for 6 years, that my heart was strong for a man my age and that I should keep walking. I called my son once to wish him a happy birthday, which fell on January 19th. He answered. He was distracted. He said he had to go in a minute. I told him I loved him. He said, "Yeah, you too, Dad." It was the last time we spoke as father and son. The recordings were everything I had been afraid they would be. I will not put you through all of it. Some of it is mine to carry. But I will tell you the worst part. On the evening of January 24th, sitting at the same dining room table where Brielle had served me roast pork, my son said the following words to his wife and to Curtis, who was apparently at their house twice a week by then. He said, "The thing is, the old man trusts me. He's not going to question it if I show up with the sleep aid. He'll think I'm being thoughtful. We just need to make sure the cardiology appointment is on the calendar, so when they find him, there's already a paper trail saying his heart was a problem." Brielle said, "What about Ren?" There was a silence on the recording for about 11 seconds. Then my son said, "Ren doesn't need to know her grandfather. She barely sees him as it is." I listened to that recording 6 times. I made myself listen to it 6 times. I wanted to be sure that the voice was his, that the words were what they were, that I was not, in my grief and my rage, inventing something. By the 6th time, I was steady. I called Adelaide. She had already heard it. Octavio sent the files to her secured server before he sent them to me. She said, "Hollis, we have him. We have all 3 of them. Now we decide what to do." Here is what I decided, and I want to explain it, because I have had a lot of time to think about whether I did the right thing. I could have gone to the police on January 25th. Adelaide told me the recordings were enough, combined with the corkboard, combined with the forged will, to bring conspiracy charges. But conspiracy charges are slippery. Brielle could turn on Trent. Trent could turn on Curtis. Curtis was a notary public who knew exactly what to say to make himself look like a dupe. They could plead it down. They could spend 3 years in a country club prison and come out and write a book. I wanted them to act. I wanted my son to walk into my apartment with a bottle of over-the-counter sleep aid that he had purchased on a credit card in his own name, with a cover story he had practiced in front of a mirror. And I wanted him to pour that sleep aid into a drink and hand it to me. And I wanted Octavio's cameras, which had by then been installed in my own apartment, to record every second of it. I wanted the attempt. Without the attempt, it was a story. With the attempt, it was a case. So on the morning of February 14th, I called my son. I said, "Trent, I'm not feeling great. My chest has been tight since yesterday. I have an appointment in the morning, but I'm a little spooked about being alone tonight. Any chance you could swing by?" There was a pause on the line that I will hear in my dreams until I die. Then he said, "Of course, Dad. I'll come right over after work. You want me to bring you anything?" I said, "Maybe something to help me sleep. I don't sleep well when I'm anxious." He said, "I've got just the thing." He arrived at 7:40. He brought a bottle of an over-the-counter sleep aid called Samaire, which I had never asked for by name, and which he had purchased that morning at a CVS in Newington, 14 miles from his house, on a credit card in his own name. He brought a 6-pack of root beer, which had been my favorite since I was a boy. He sat with me in my living room for 45 minutes. We talked about Ren. We talked about a Patriots game from the previous fall. He asked about my will, gently, the way you might ask an old man about the weather. I told him it was all in order. My attorney had a copy. The apartment and the Buick would be his. He nodded. He looked at the floor. At 8:25, he went into my kitchen to get us some root beer. I heard the cabinet open. I heard the bottle of Samaire rattle. I heard him pour. He came back out with 2 glasses. He handed me mine. He raised his. He said, "To Mom." I had not heard him say her name in 3 years. I touched my glass to his. I brought it to my lips. I did not drink. I set the glass to his. I did not drink. I set the glass down on the side table. I looked at my son and I said the only thing I had rehearsed. I said, "Trent, the woman who raised you spent her last good afternoon telling me to make you earn your life. I have spent 25 years finding out whether you would. I want you to know that when they come through that door in about 90 seconds, I am thinking about her, and I am thinking about how disappointed she is in both of us. Me, for failing to raise you better. You, for being what you are. He didn't understand at first. He looked at the glass. He looked at me. His face went through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. Confusion, calculation, fear. The knock came at the door at 8:27. It was the Hartford Police Department. 2 detectives Adelaide had been working with for 3 weeks, with a warrant for the recordings, the Samare bottle, the credit card receipt, and my son. They had picked up Brielle at the Colonial 12 minutes earlier. Curtis they got the next morning at his office in Bloomfield, where he was, I have been told, in the middle of explaining a 401k rollover to a 62-year-old widow. The trial took 14 months. Adelaide did not represent me. She's retired, and she said the case needed someone with current standing. But she sat behind me every day. The prosecution played the recordings. They showed the corkboard, they showed the forged will, and they showed the real one, which had been on file in a vault in Stamford for 19 years, and which left the entirety of a $43 million trust to a foundation Margaret and I had set up, in her name, to fund treatment for women with ovarian cancer who could not afford it. The look on my son's face when that document was read aloud is a thing I will not describe, because some things, even the people who deserve them, should not be described. The jury was out for 4 hours. They came back with guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, forgery, solicitation. The judge gave Trent 28 years. He gave Brielle 25. Curtis got 18, plus the loss of his notary commission and his financial planning license, which was the only part of the sentencing that made him cry. Ren is being raised by Brielle's sister, a woman named Caprice, who lives in New Haven, and who I had only met twice before all of this happened. Caprice and I have an arrangement. I see Ren one Sunday a month at a park near Caprice's house, and I bring her a book each time, and we read it together on a bench, and I do not tell her anything about her parents that she does not ask. And when she asks, which she has started to do, I tell her the truth in the smallest pieces I can find. She is 6 now. She knows her father did something very wrong. She does not yet know what. I have set aside a portion of the trust for her, in a structure she cannot touch until she is 35, with conditions Margaret would have approved of. She will earn her life too. That is the only inheritance worth giving. People ask me, when they hear the story, whether I blame myself, whether the secrecy I kept, the pretending to be poor, the test I ran on my own son, made him into what he became. I have thought about it. I have thought about it on 1,000 nights when I could not sleep. And I will tell you what I have come to. A man does not poison his father because his father drove a Buick. A man does not forge a will because his father did not hand him a fortune at 22. The seed of what my son became was in him before I made any of those choices. And what my choices did was give that seed time to either die in the dark or grow into what it grew into. It grew. That is on him. It is also, in some measure, I will carry until I am in the ground next to Margaret on me, for not seeing it earlier, and for not knowing how to pull it out by the roots when I might have. But the woman next to me, the woman whose hand I held for 34 years, asked me to do one thing. She asked me to find out. I found out. And then I did what a father is supposed to do when his child is dangerous, which is to stop him before he hurts somebody who can't stop him on their own. I drive a different car now. A used Toyota. The Buick finally gave out the spring after the trial. I still wear the brown corduroy jacket. I still live in the same apartment. I do not need anything more than I have, and I never did. And that, in the end, is the part of the story that nobody who tried to kill me ever understood. They thought I was hiding a fortune. I was hiding a promise. The fortune was just the thing the promise was made of. Ren and I are reading a book about a girl who befriends a fox. Next month we'll start a new one. I am 68 years old. I have a strong heart. The cardiologist says I might have another 20 years. I plan to use them. I've spent a lot of nights since the trial sitting in the same chair where I made those 3 phone calls, and I have asked myself the same question over and over. Where did it begin? Not the night I walked down those basement stairs. Not the day Trent met Brielle. Where did it actually begin? Here is what I have come to. Every choice a person makes plants something. Margaret used to say that. She said character is just the harvest of 1,000 small decisions nobody was watching you make. My son made small decisions for years that nobody was watching, and by the time anyone was looking, the harvest was in. The credit cards he ran up in college and asked me to quietly clear. The job he quit because his manager didn't see his vision. The friend he dropped the moment that friend stopped being useful. I saw all of those things. I made excuses for all of those things. I told myself he was finding his way. I was wrong, and I was wrong on purpose, because the truth was harder than the excuse. That is the part I want anyone listening to take with them. We do not get blindsided by the people we love. We get warned in small ways for years, and we ignore the warnings because loving somebody is supposed to mean believing in them. But there is a difference between believing in a person and refusing to see who they actually are. Real love is the harder thing. Real love looks at a man and tells him the truth about himself, even when it costs you the comfort of pretending. The other thing I want to say is this. Brielle and Curtis did not corrupt my son. They found him already corrupted, and they fit themselves to the shape of what was already there. A person of real character cannot be talked into killing his father over money, no matter who is whispering in his ear. The whisper only works when there is already an ear that wants to hear it. That is the cause. The basement workbench was the effect. So if I am going to leave you with anything from what happened to me, it is 3 things, and they are the 3 things Margaret used to talk about on the porch in the summers when our boy was small. Be honest, even when honesty costs you. Use your head, especially when your heart is screaming at you not to. And do the hard thing when the hard thing is the right thing, because nobody else is going to do it for you. Trent had every advantage a child can have, except the willingness to do those 3 things, and without them, every other gift he was given turned into a weapon he eventually pointed at the people who loved him. I am 68 years old. I do not have the time or the inclination to be bitter. What I have is a granddaughter who reads with me on a bench once a month, and a promise I made to a woman I loved, and a quiet apartment, and a heart the doctor says is strong. That is enough. It was always enough. I just needed the rest of my life to find out.